questions. There you go. We have that smooth voice, don't we? Yeah, so welcome. Thank you for being here. It's kind of really exciting session. And I say that because I think we've there's so many different things within the realm of translation. And we've brought together people who have parts of those jigsaw puzzles, at least some of them as the presenters, but I think you as the audience, as the participants, hopefully can contribute into that as well. I'll just share these two links again. The first one being, well, I'll share them in reverse order this time. The first one being some more information about the session, and then the next one being notes for the session. Yeah. Great. We're going to the program for today is, well, we'll run up now till like 10 past the hour. And this is, I think, the first event of the overall event, and then we'll be finishing up. And then I think you have a 2-hour break before the next session. The format for today is that we'll have 4 short presentations, no more than 10 minutes apiece. But I will ask the presenters to kind of keep to time, because it's really quite important for us to have a discussion at the end. And the point of the workshop and the point of the discussion is that I think between the different participants here, we're trying to figure out which workflows need addressing within translation, and what are the tools that can be used, and what are, say, the pain points, the problems. So we're wanting to do some mapping, so the discussion is very important to try to do that. And I suppose the overall objective is to be able to come away with some pointers, some kind of, in a certain sense, a kind of brainstorming to try to make some kind of working guides. And it would be really interesting if people would like to contribute to those afterwards. So the objective, is to try to put together some kind of guides for the different types of workflows. So I think we'll get underway, and the running order, we have 4 projects presenting. Peter Murray-Rust is going to present first on Sev Open, which is using Wiki Data. And then Victor Venema on Translate Science. I'll let, And then maybe Joe Haverman and maybe others on Africa Archive, and Masaka Hana on decolonizing science. And then Axel Durkup, who's part of a community on single source publishing, but talking about a working workflow for content translation. So I think I'd hand over to Peter now. So Peter, maybe if you want to turn on your microphone.
Hello.
Yeah. Hi.
And greetings to everyone. It shouldn't be me presenting, it should be my colleagues from India to make this a more multinational thing. So I'm standing in for them. What we've been doing over the last year and a half is we've been collecting together information about plants and about viruses, and we've been doing it with a multinational approach. So here you can see the Hindi page on Wikipedia for cones, which is part of a...
Oh, sorry, just a second, Peter. Are you trying to, are you sharing your screen?
I'm sorry, I've forgotten to share my screen now.
Yeah.
I'll start again, share screen. Oh, I'm not allowed to.
You're not allowed to, okay.
Host disabled participant screen sharing.
Okay, then give me a second. If anyone's got any kind of like, if anyone knows how you enable someone, I'll be very happy for the advice, because I'm not really the world's best
could be possible that you should go to security or something like that, and the bottom
in the bottom
line
bar.
on the left, and then you allow screen sharing. You should be allowed because you're co-host.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe I pick this. Pick the participants. Just sorry, bear with me.
There's a link that people can click on in the chat, and that will show what I'm showing on the screen at the moment. And that's probably enough for me to talk about everything I need to. I'll keep talking until you've worked this out, Simon.
Yeah,
okay?
sure thing. Okay, thank you.
Right. So we run a project in New Delhi, India, which is on plants. It's the National Institute for Plant Genome Research. And our goal is to index the whole scientific literature for plants. And this can be valuable for not just for scientists, but for farmers, for policymakers, for all sorts of things like that. And we're looking for documents, open access publications, which contain mentions of plants, and they might also contain chemicals that the plants produce, or they might contain pests of those plants or whatever, so that we could, for example, look for invasive species in India and find what were the invasive plant species that we have. Are we getting anywhere, Simon?
No, sorry, we're not.
Okay. Well, I will try and post another link then. We have a project in GitHub. We do everything on the open web so that everybody can see it. I'm ad hocing this, okay. So here.
Sorry, I think you should be able to share now, Peter.
Oh, okay, good. That makes it a little bit easier. So let's try. Okay, good.
Sorry, I wasn't told I was going to be tech admin on this.
Don't worry, we never are. Right, okay. So I'm going to show 3 slides roughly. What I want to emphasize here is that Wikipedia, whom you all know, has actually got many hundred languages, and that for many pages you can find the page created by your local language experts around the world. And this is not a translation of the English page. This is actually put in place by volunteers who want to create a Hindi Wikipedia. Now, not only this, but that Wikimedia also has something called Wiki Data, which I'm going to show you. And Wiki Data is all of the information in this formalized into a semantic dictionary. So I'm going to show you Wiki Data for this, but first I'm going to show you that this has got here Wiki Data. We'll go to the entry for that. And here you can see there's a universal identifier. So that's the same for all languages in the world. But if we look at this, we can find that there are a large number of languages, limited only by the volunteers to put them in. So if you want to find what the Wikimedia community thinks are equivalents or commentary on or whatever, then Wikidata is a clearinghouse for this sort of thing. You can get this in different languages here. So a cone is a sex organ and a type of fruit. So you've got the whole semantic background of this. And we have been using this. I hope I can now find my, let me just show you the wonderful people who, as I say, should be presenting instead of me, but the day didn't work out. So last year, we put together a resource for viruses to try and give people information about the pandemic. And you can see that we've got people from all over India, one from China, and they put together each a dictionary where they had not only the English language words, but they also had equivalents in many languages. So Ambreen, where's Ambreen? Ambreen here put together a resource for all the countries in the world with all the languages that describe those countries. And I'm just going to finish on the type of thing we're creating. We're creating what we call a dictionary with a term here, always located in Wikimedia, in Wiki Data. So here we've got a whole list of synonyms in different languages, and that will help you both read an English language scientific paper, because at the moment, unfortunately, there is a preponderance of English language, and that's compounded by the neo-colonialist approach that the publishers Northern Science takes. But that will help non-English speakers understand what this word cone means, for example. And also it can work in reverse, that if you have a native language publication, then you can, non-English publication, you can look this up in here and someone from an English background can translate this automatically, because these will be particularly important for scientific terms. So I think I'll stop there. What I'll say is infrastructure, dictionaries, everything is open. So if this appeals to you, and I'm particularly thinking of preprint archives, for example, in Latin America with the wonderful America, Redelic and Cielo publications, and also in Indonesia, where it will be possible, we're building a search system, so you'll be able to search and index those preprints in languages other than English. Okay, Simon?
Great, thank you very much, Peter. And what I would, and the SEB Open team who can't be here today, but what I'd say is I posted a link there, and if we could, and this is something very important, if we could hold questions up to the last 20 minutes, that would be good, because we're going to rattle through these pretty fast. And yeah, I think that kind of makes sense. I'm going to share my screen now, because I have some slides from Victor. Victor Venema from Translate Science, if you'd like to tell people about the project.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Fortunately, I did ask Simon to be my technical assistant. So I'm Victor Venema. I'm a Dutch climatologist currently living in Germany. And I want to present a network of people interested in translating the scientific literature. Next slide. When it comes to the scientific literature, we take a really broad view. It's not just articles, it's also reports, books, abstracts, titles, keywords, and also the terms Peter is interested in definitely fall in our area of interest. So we want to support work on tools and services to make translations or to make them available, and advocate for translating science. And this is important in two different ways. The translations help science. For me personally, for example, I need to know how old climate measurements were made, and that's normally information written in local languages. And in similar ways, scientists need much local information on the kind of problems people have, the kind of solutions which are proposed so that you can study the consequences. And also simply a lot of literature is available in other languages and should not be ignored. That would be an enormous amount of double work, all for nothing. But also in the other way around, by making translations, we make science much more useful. And the people who use such translations are doing a lot of converting science into actual societal value. That could be activists, that could be architects, that could be advisors, policymakers, journalists. Many people on the edges of science need access to quality scientific information. And by making translations, we make that a lot easier. Next slide. So there are many things we could do. It's a really broad topic. I mentioned a few which we are already doing and some which we hope to be doing in future or hope that others will do in future. We already started with promoting translations and helping each other. For that, we have a blog for current topics and for discussions. We have a wiki as more or less a way to fix information on how to make translations, how to encode informations of metadata on translations in your web pages and in your XML files, all that kind of things, what kind of tools there are. We have an email distribution list for internal discussions, and we keep in touch with the community on the microblogging site Mastodon. Then we want to work on tools. The first option, translation database, is what I will show in the next slides. It's a way to better find translations, but also what Peter is doing would be such a tool which makes science more accessible. Later on, maybe we could work on collaborative translations. You need quite a few skills to translate the scientific articles, both topical, disciplinary, and language skills. And if you do that in a group, that's much easier to get and make good quality translations. And it's probably also more fun to do it collaboratively. Multilingual search would help that many more national science work in national languages is not ignored. And once you found it, maybe people will then ask for the translation. We want to work on an advocacy. At the moment, a translated article is hardly valued. And if you're unlucky, it's even seen as plagiarism. We think it is a valuable contribution to science to translate a scientific article. Google at the moment seems to see translated keywords as spamming keywords and punishing people for it. That should change. They are valid. And when it comes to copyrights, I'm a little bit of two minds. On the one hand, I like now making more translations to make open access publications more worthwhile. But on the other hand, it's also a pity that at the moment we are not allowed to translate copyrighted works. And I hope we might be able to convince people to change such copyright things. And in the next presentation, we will see some people working on actually making translations, which of course is the final aim. So then on to the translation switchboard. We have started designing a first simple homepage, of which you see a screenshot. You can insert a DOI and then find the translations that belong to the DOI, or in the end also insert title words or topics, and then see all the original articles for which we have translations. Next slide. So that is how that would look like if you, in this case, search for homogenization, my topic. We would have, in this case, 4 original articles with several translations in several languages. Quite optimistic view, but who knows where we will get. Next slide. And if you then would go to the view for one specific original article, you would see here that we have 2 English translations of a Russian article, one in Spanish and one in German. It's not just pure translations. It can, for example, also be a PhD thesis, which has the same topic as a scientific article. It could be a partial translation, which still needs to be finished, or it could also be a summary. We are in principle open to all of those things to be put into our database to help people find the right scientific information. Next slide. So this homepage is nice for, hopefully in the end, it will also have more interactive features so people can discuss, vote and assess how good translations are, flag bad translations, and moderate and even upload links to their own translations. But in the end, probably most people will not use the homepage. We would like to integrate this system with as many other systems as possible. if you're on a journal page and there is a translation available, it would be great if the home page would immediately tell you that. The same for repositories, for a reference manager, if you're on your reading list, it would be great if the reference manager would immediately, I've got a translation in your own native language of this article. One could also create a browser add-on that if you're on the homepage of an article, the browser would warn you that there is a translation in one of the languages you master. And we could also feed back information from our database back into Wiki Data and then make it in that way also available via Scholia, where people can make lists of their own articles, and they could then automatically add the translations to their own articles as well. And we want to import data from Wiki Data, but also from Crossref, which already has something like 2,000 translations. National libraries, international organizations like the World Meteorological Organizations often made translations, and we could insert them. Research Institute like the Met Office, UK Met Office, made many translations in the past, and we'd like to encourage them all to send those translations to us so that we can add them to the database. I thank you for your attention.
Great, thank you so much, Victor. I would say on the translation switchboard, this is a project which I suppose you're beginning to make into reality.
Yeah, we just started coding 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So these are really preliminary screenshots.
Great, thank you.
And yeah, if there are people interested in this kind of topic, do join us. And it's not just about the switchboard. We do whatever volunteers are interested in, as long as it's on the topic of scientific translations.
Great, thank you. Well, we can catch up with a kind of round of questions at the end. So I think I would go on to invite people from the Decolonizing Science group collective. I'm not quite sure who's, I think there's a number of you talking. So maybe I just kind of probably let you, let me know who's gonna go first.
Hi, Sam, and apparently it's me going first.
Okay.
And then Joanna's going to take over.
So
and
you kind of got 10 minutes in total between you.
Cool. Awesome. Am I able to share my screen now?
You should be able to. You should have a green button at the bottom.
Yeah. Let me do the thing and see if it does the thing. Great.
You're sharing.
Cool. Thank you for having me, and thank you. I think Joanna, who's also part of this team from Africa Archive, she arranged that we have this. And so we're a collective of organizations working together on a particular project with, kind of one of the long-term goals being to decolonize science. So I'm co-founded an initiative called Masakane. And we are a group of natural language processing practitioners. So this is any sort of language technology. And one of the kind of core systems we work on are machine translation systems. We're doing this project in collaboration with Africa Archive, which is a preprint server for African research, the Science Link, which is a group of scientific communicators, ST Communications, who are a translation agency from Africa, based in Africa, and then Bantukrisi, which are a ethics, decolonial ethics organization. And so the overall rationale is when it comes to scientific communication and education, language matters. And the ability for science to be discussed in local indigenous matters not only has the ability to reach more people who don't speak English or French or another primary colonial language, but also has the ability to integrate facts and methods of science into cultures that have been denied it in the past. And so this project stems from kind of this long history of Africa in particular, and I believe South America has very similar history in this case, where most of the countries within Africa, their primary language, according to official governments, is either English or French or Portuguese, and yet majority of the population speaks their home or native language while communicating. And so kind of what we originally wanted to do, coming from a language technology background, is to say, hey, can we build a machine translation system, or at least start moving towards that can kind of aid or make it a lot easier for us to translate from English into an African language. And so, on this very large and ambitious goal, we said, we'll do step one, which is we're going to create a data set. A data set is basically, in this context, would be text in one language and then in parallel text in another language. And this is what we use to power machine translation systems, is these loads and loads of data. And one of the big issues with African data in particular is there is very little data, even for kind of the general space. Even if we're talking Wikipedia, there's very little articles written in African languages. So our first step said, let's try to translate 180 of these papers into 6 African languages in order to support terminology development in those languages, but also in the long run, kind of build these machine translation tools. And so our original process, since this is very much focused on systems, our original process, we thought we'd select papers. We had a whole bunch of criteria, what would be important for that. We're going to run some sort of terminology development exercise, and then we're going to convert from these papers, we're going to translate them into African languages, and out will pop these translated papers in glossary. Where that fits in kind of the natural language space is, or the natural language technology space, is we take those translated papers, we make what we call a corpus, and that becomes input to training a machine translation model for a particular language set. Sort of what we realized reasonably early on, after we had a scientific translation workshop, was that this process was absolutely not going to work. So this process was I thought about it, or 2 of us thought about it in our own head and said, yeah, let's do this. And that after doing the scientific translation workshop, we very quickly realized that this was not going to happen. And the workshop involved bringing scientific communicators who are experienced in working with scientific content, as well as the translators, as well as linguists, as well as machine translation experts, to all kind of discuss and work together. And so we learned a number of things from this workshop. So one of them was that in order to translate a scientific paper, you need to have this deep understanding of the field. The second part was that, when scientific writing is, when it's published in English, it isn't actually in English. It's in a specific dialect of scientific English. And that dialect is often very particular to the field itself. And so people who understand English, or even understand their field of scientific English, have difficulties understanding something from a different field. And so what we realized is that we needed, not only was this translating a scientific paper very, very intensive, there was far more jargon words than expected. Originally, we said, maybe we'll create terminology for a couple of words. And then it turns out that most of the papers are jargon, right? A jargon that we need to go and create words for African languages, because they simply don't exist. And so what ended up happening, just to translate a single abstract and do some terminology creation, not even properly, it took between 1 and 3 hours for each of our translation groups. And so what we considered is that we were doing 2 things at once. We were trying to translate from English into, from scientific English into kind of a layman's English. And then that would be, actually understandable, because I think scientific papers aren't necessarily written to be accessible. And then we translate from English into the African language. And instead of doing both at once, our idea was, maybe we can, how can we split this up somehow, that we translate from scientific English into a kind of more standard English, and from that standard English into an African language. And we didn't want to lose sight of our goals. And despite realizing how infeasible this would be to do right now, our goals are that, we really want to decolonize this field. We'd like people on the African continent to be able to talk about science to each other, 2 scientists talking about their work in isiZulu, for example. We want to also enable these scientific conversations in African languages, but at the same time, there's a need to make, the research that does exist accessible to the African public. And here we were specifically focusing on African scientific discoveries made by African scientists. And we still want to, in the long term, build a tool for African scientific communicators to, start speaking about their work in their native language, as opposed to in English. And so we split our system into two sort of phases. The first phase, where we're doing a scientific journalist or communicator phase, where we take the proposed paper and we're creating a layman's summary. We're going to highlight, create a jargon glossary of some of the important scientific words, and kind of highlight which of those are important to consider for terminology creation rather than transliteration. So words that aren't so specific that you'll never hear them out of that particular paper's field's context, but would have broader impact. So which are the words that we need to invest the time into to create new technology. And then secondly, we're going to work on a translation phase where instead of translating the papers, we're just going to translate the layperson summaries, then translate the abstracts, which the translators are now empowered to do because they have the layperson summary. And then we'll translate the actual glossaries themselves. And so this is sort of the setup we're going to have. And instead of having these translated papers, we now, through our learnings, we're going to instead have these translated layperson summary, translated abstracts, translated glossaries, and new terms for important keywords. And instead, we're going to use this to start training machine translation systems. Yeah, that's my brief summary. We're also going to try to translate a lot more. Joanna, do you want to take over?
Yeah, Simon, how much time have we got?
Like a couple of minutes, 2 minutes.
Okay, well, that's fair enough. Great, and yeah, excellent outlining. Thanks, Jade. Let me also briefly share my screen. I just want to chip in and explain like how, for us as Africa Archive, this work is key and important, and how we are enjoying the process and working with Masakana and the whole team. So since our inception as a preprint repository, which now which like a year ago has grown into an open access portal for African research output. At our launch, we made a promise, and it was also super natural for us to, of course, accept submissions in languages other than English, explicitly also indigenous African languages. And you can find the explanation of why and how on our website, and I'll check the link to that in the chat as well. And basically, well, there's more than 2,000 local or registered languages spoken on the continent. To some, we have some sorts of dictionaries and written descriptions for linguistic work from inside and outside Africa. As Africa Archive, in providing the preprint and also dataset repository or several systems thereof, we want to enable mutual learning for African and non-African scholars to improve on these informations, also in terms of language diversity and science, and to enable African scholars to do and conduct research in their mother tongues, in their local languages, to basically be able, as Jade also pointed out, to empower African scholars to claim ownership of their cultural heritages through language, which is basically enshrined in languages or in indigenous languages. So there's many reasons of why and how we do things as Africa Archive, and in particular also in the collaboration with Masakana. On our website, this is just some pragmatism. We have a plugin in our website backend that automatically translates into, I think, 12 languages spoken on the continent, including German and English and French and Portuguese, but also Hausa, Afrikaans, and Kiswahili, which are already readily available by Google Translate and other machine learning systems, auto translation services. And yeah, and through the work with Masakana, we have to do our part and contribute to expanding these resources. I think sooner or later, other people also mentioned the work of the team behind the Helsinki initiative, which is key also, or it's also very much empowering to see that researchers from different parts of the world see importance in this, which to us here in the room apparently is most natural. And we also were encouraged by the work, which is again very pragmatic and volunteer driven, the work in translating contents that are scholarly relevant by, I think, Chip Zamit, Dora and the Helsinki initiative to translate resources for scholarly services into various languages. But we think that translation is basically a gap in the scholarly system to have as professional services. And in the Decolonizing Science project, Masakane, we work with these various stakeholders who all have professional expertise on translations, but in academia, we're missing that link, which we here was also proposed to establish, I guess. But yeah, so it's exciting to be here with you all, and thanks for listening.
Great, thank you, Joe and Jade. Yeah, so what I would now ask is that Axel from the single source publishing community, can briefly present.
Great, thank you very much. Hi everybody, I'm happy to be here. Joe, could you stop your screen sharing, please, so that I think I can take over that. Thank you. So I make it short. I want to show a project that I developed together with colleagues 2015, and for the Hamburg Open Online University, which you hopefully can see now. We had the feeling that 2015, with many people coming from other countries as refugees to Germany, we had the feeling that we have a privilege and working at the university, and we wanted to explain the complicated system of education and vocational training in Germany to them, in order to not have them start all over again, although they came with a biography of work and vocational training from their home countries. And what the German system usually does is they send you to some kind of training to start from scratch. And we thought, well, let's point to the possibilities, to the opportunities for refugees, for example, from Syria or from African countries, how they can continue with their work and their education here in Germany. And to make it short, we set up several web pages and wrote a very long book, as you can see here, in German. I show you the English content here so that you at least get a clue of what it is all about, explaining with questions asked how this works in Germany. And as these people we had in mind came from Persian-speaking countries and Arab-speaking countries, we needed a translation in these languages. So we wanted to do this on the web. We wanted to do this with right-to-left languages. And we had a very good experience with a tool called Gitbook, which still exists but became unfortunately proprietary. It's a so-called static site generator, which I love. I still love. I switch to others, but they make it possible to have multi-language content built on Markdown, which is a very simple markup language for also scientific content. And one aspect led our decision to use Crowdin, which is, if you will, a proprietary tool. It was the only tool, 2015, which made it possible to write in the browser a combination of right to left and left to right words. The problem was that when we explained the German bureaucracy to in Arabic language, we needed to keep the German terms for certain organizations as they are. So the technical challenge was to find an editor who could mix the two directions within the browser. And Crowdin at that time was the only tool who did this. So this is, I have to apologize that I don't use open source all the way through, although I love WebLate, which is a great project. But this was what it still does, and it's free for open source projects. You have to write a mail and they give you everything for free. And it's still 6 years after that, it's still, I checked. So just to show you the technical aspects of that, we have this repository in a GitHub-like tool. It's called GitLab. It's the same, but open source, hosted at a university. And it has a folder structure, as you can see, ISO style, German, Arabic language, Farsi, and English. And what's now possible is, as we had the money to hire some translators who were not as much hackers as we were, but translators, we need to encapsulate all the technical complexity behind a nice front end. And this is what, for example, Crowdin does. I show you an example from some file here. This is a file from the book. And it goes like this. You have a string on the left, this is the original, and then you type in the English or whatever sentence here. And then you go back and you save it. And this is what really still amazes me, is that if you save this in Crowdin, you can connect it to GitLab, and the machines on Crowdin, they automatically commit to GitLab and build the whole book after every translation that is built. So you have some kind of continuous integration of all the translations, and whenever a translator is done with his or her work, the book or whatever you want to have is being built. So there's nothing, translators don't have to do anything with complicated technology. They use a very nice front end, like with this Crowdin thing here, and you can connect it with every custom or on-premise hosted version of GitLab. And this makes it possible to build PDFs and websites at the same time, or build whatever you want. You can build whatever you want on the web. So this was short, I hope.
Great, thank you, Axel. And I'm sure many of us here love to get hold of something like this, and have been tearing our hair out with dislocated organic translations, which is kind of the thing that happens. Yeah, so I would say, well, first of all, maybe if there's just any questions from people about wanting to know more about specific things that we've had here. Yeah, I think first of all, just open up the floor, really. We have another 15 minutes left. Thank you, everyone, for keeping on time. It's really great.
Maybe a question for Africa Archive. You said that you needed many terms, jargon terms, to be translated, but there were no original terms yet in those African languages. In Dutch, we more or less have the same problem. Many of those words don't exist, only exist in scientific English. And we simply then use the English word. Is there an option for African languages, or does that simply, is the mismatch between the languages then so big? Because in principle, jargon has a function. It does allow you to be more precise, and it helps the reader then also to know really which term in the English language is intended. And if you start making some sort of your own translation, you might be wondering which of the three jargon terms is actually intended here.
Yeah, so I think the way we compromised this was, well, not compromised, we acknowledged that some jargon terms are so specific and relevant, whereas some terms that are probably not even considered jargon in many other languages, they just didn't have an African language support for it, so they basically become jargon. So there was like a big separation between words that should be used in scientific conversation, which should be understandable by everyone, as opposed to this high level, very scientific jargon. And so the very scientific jargon we proposed doing transliteration, and kind of one of the big outcomes is saying, well, if we're transliterating to make it fit in a little bit more with the language, then we should transliterate, try use similar rules for doing that. So we end up with one transliterated term. And so part of the project is kind of developing how we do the transliteration. So in some African languages, so for example, in Amharic, they literally just take the word and they just rewrite it in their, the Amharic script. Whereas in isiZulu, it's a matter of adding like an identifier. Is this an object? Is this a verb? And so you add a character to the front of the word based on that. And so you got this transliteration of jargon that is very specific, but there are words that don't exist that should be there for basic scientific communication. And those are the ones we consider for terminology development.
Okay, thank you.
I think we've seen a number of, it's interesting that we're seeing a spread over from your decolonizing science project where I wasn't really aware that you were starting with machine learning, or that was a component of it. I'd read it as there was 180 articles and you were working on the translation, because I thought that introducing the SEV open Wiki Data project was something that I think on the surface of it, many people would think of translation as being about translating the content as the kind of just the written text and materials. But I think the importance of things like the use of Wikidata for correlating material, connecting translations, was something we wanted to bring in here. And potentially that, I mean, what is being pointed to with Wikidata is within the kind of Wikiverse, Wiki universe, as it being an enabling kind of framework. Although, as you say, in lots of Wikimedia world, there might not be the occurrence of these different languages, but it can be something that things can be done on top of.
Yeah, I think for us, it was this idea, and we've spoken about it, is using Wikidata as a means for disseminating because it's so widely accessed. And what we found is that, for us, if we're creating terminology, you need to get that into the hands of people for it to start being used. And these glossaries that go via language boards in Africa aren't very helpful. And so Wikidata being a place that we could, start capturing those terms and in the long run help them build up the tools to do so, I think is something we're definitely looking at.
I think we've also, sorry, yeah, Joe.
Just to chip in on that question, I think there's still a lot of open question marks in how to link. Like we were thinking on the side of Africa Archive to treat translations like preprint versions, but independent versions, and then linking back to the original article, which is most probably in English or French or Arabic in our cases. Well, starting with English. But yeah, I mean, there is several, also highlighted here, there's several ways to do this. The important thing is to make sure as a best practice that the original source and the translations are interlinked with each other through Crossref or cross-facilitated UI, like specific DOIs systems. But yeah, and I very much to encourage also, because I think that was also set as a vision, as an outcome for this session, to maybe, I'd be very keen to continue these conversations further to see how we can link up with each other and learn from best practices and learn, not so that not everybody has to learn all these different systems, but we actually collaborate on this. I think that's also the idea. So we could kind of maybe start the conversation towards how do we continue this. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a very good point. As you say, Joe, there are a lot of question marks here. And even though you can point to the potential of, being, say Wikidata or Wikimedia, but let's say Wikidata as having this potential, what I do notice is that when you try to look at how you might make an article visible in Wikidata, it's pretty complicated. And I don't see the guidance being that, it's a learning curve itself. So I would hope that, something we could do out of this would be to maybe help one another, make easier ways to make use of that. One question I'd have for people is about, there seems to be a number of places here where people are looking at getting kind of, I don't know, either like, well, let's say voluntary contributions into different people helping with the translations. What are approaches to that? I wonder in the Africa Archive context, how are you bringing in your translators, I suppose?
But we don't have the workflow established because we don't have many inquiries or any, to be honest, after 3 years of operation. But now with this pilot project that we're kind of co-developing or is supporting and facilitating with Mr. Kana, we hope to do just that. And I mean, we have another project which is looking into the peer review aspects, and then translation also plays a role there. So we're basically trying to see it like an overall workflow in like integrating the translation aspect or summary and the keywords and titles being translated into at least one other language, if not more. And we have that also as encouragement to the authors since like the first year or like launch. But yeah, I mean, it's work in process. It's also a mindset thing, and people are not used to see like translations of research much thereof, and most would argue, oh, it's English anyway, so why should I even put the extra effort? So it's a lot of advocacy is also needed to raise awareness of the necessity and the benefits that this work brings, but also it brings a lot of extra work for sure. And that's what we, I think, in this consortium or growing group of, you know, experienced translation facilitators can leverage and kind of provide the platform for exchange of best practices.
So when you upload an article to Africa Archive, there is somewhere a banner which says you're also welcome to upload a translation. Because in principle, that would be great. The authors are the best ones, have the most expertise to make a really good translation.
Yeah,
Does it work somehow?
We have a couple of examples in place. Like different systems also have different ways in enabling for that, like technically. In OSF, the Open Science Framework, you would have to use the abstract window, and I'm actually not sure how many words are not words, but digits are accepted there. But we'll have to squeeze it in together with the abstract and then the translation thereof, or you put it in the manuscript, and then it's not machine readable. In Science Open, you have a lay summary additional to the abstract window. So they suggest you should use that lay summary part for providing a translation where you can specify the language, but you cannot put a ISO language kind of, you know, then the language wouldn't be machine readable. I've seen, I can't recall the names, but a couple of journals and publishers have looked into this and started enabling multiple language submissions for title and keywords and abstracts. And also personally, I think there's no point in making the, like, it's like also the discussions in the workshop that Jade talked about, like translating the whole article is such an overkill. And I'm not sure if that's even worth the effort, because what we want to achieve in our view is to provide access to the knowledge. And then the access is on the actual exchange of experiences on the human level. And then you can consult translations to actually have conversations on the matter, but that's a whole other discussion to have. But of course, it would still be nice to I'm not saying we shouldn't still have the workflow and the technology in place to enable for machine facilitated translation of methodologies and all these, you know, components of a research article that we're used to, as that also changes now in the preprint era that we live in. Says an advocate of preprints, but so yeah, there's many aspects, and yeah, and many workarounds currently, and we're yet to see the perfect system, which again I think only this group can suggest or even build.
Okay, so maybe it could still work to engage also the authors if we have better systems to ask them. And yeah, I really agree. Just translating the abstract is already immensely valuable. That's half of the value of the full article probably, and a lot less work. Axel?
Thanks. From what I've heard so far, I think a combination of a machine learning translation suggestion of the abstract and a pipeline through the author, the original author, for correcting this suggestion might speed up the process. Because I think it's a lot of work. We know this from the book that I showed. From this crowd-in software, I know that there's machine learning and the translation memory, they call it, and it's really smart, because once you have translated something, it suggests your translations, so it speeds up the more you do with it. And well, I think the combination here again with AI and humans is the best to go forward.
Yeah, I think that's interesting what you say there, Axel, because and I think this is kind of, I think it's about connecting all these threads together, because as you say, Joe, I think we're here to try to see how we can bring together these different parts that kind of already exist, but it's about how you combine them and where you see their weaknesses, as Jade has pointed out. So I think what I would like to say is, because we've kind of come up to time, we've come up to the end of time, is that, I mean, I think in a certain sense, this conversation should be, I think it would be a good idea for it to be carried over on Translate Science, because Translate Science is about translating science. It's a dedicated thing, and the conversation has to be picked up somewhere. So I will just put in the address there, and we can, between us, have a conversation after this about how we can pick up things. And yeah, and as I said at the beginning, this is very much about the fact that there are various parts in place, and as Axel has shown, as we know, many have actually been used in the past and still exist. But I do think we are in a phase of open science where opening up to these questions about about knowledge justice, global knowledge justice, are on the table now. They were maybe always part of it, but they weren't made visible. And I think, as we know, to do with these things, it is about acting on them. It is about doing things. And it's probably only down to us to help put that in place. So I think, unless anyone has any more questions, I'd say it's probably a good idea for us to wrap up here, because we've kind of hit our time. I would, so unless anyone wants to say anything else, or
maybe very quickly, I agree that a good way to keep in touch with this community would be if people get onto the Translate Science email distribution list. That would be a perfectly fine place to keep the discussion going.
Yeah,
everyone is welcome.
And so hopefully you can find that through that wiki link that is put on there. I would also just point people to a workshop that's happening, being organized by a EU-funded project and LIBER, which is the Association of Research Libraries in Europe. It's only valuable and interesting because in the European context, they have to deal with many languages and how that is done and balanced. I mean, obviously we're interested in a global set of questions, but there probably are things that can be learned from this So I think that's just kind of interesting. And as a last point here, I will do a plug because we are in the Force 11 session. Force 11 has its conference coming up in, I think, 7th till 9th of December. And I'm pretty sure that these types of conversations are going to be picked up there too. So I would encourage people to drop in on that. So I think, I'd like to end it there. And thank you for spending your time with us today. And thank you for the presenters. That's great. And I will collect together whatever slides I think, that people think they would like to share and put that up with this recording of today. So yes, great, thank you. Have a good day. And your next session, if you're joining it, is I think in 2 hours time. Well, less than 2 hours time or something around that. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Simon.
Bye. Thanks for organizing.
Bye.
Ciao, ciao.